if people take nothing else away from this chat that we have today, I hope that they take away that point. It's that mineral deficiencies, it's not just deficiencies, but imbalances. They make you much more predisposed to bioaccumulate heavy metals. And there's actually really interesting research on the mechanism or the mechanisms through which this is happening.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Wendy Myers. Welcome to the Myers Detox podcast. We have a great show for you today. It's my really good friend, Clark Engelbert, and I've known him for like almost a decade. We were friends on Facebook and would chat about, hair mineral analysis and heavy metals here and there and bounce ideas off each other. And so I'm really happy that he's really taken his research on heavy metals to like the next level and is here to discuss a lot of different topics with us related to that. And so we're going to be talking about, mineral deficiencies and how those cause heavy metals to accumulate. That's one of the reasons we accumulate heavy metals and become a heavy metal toxic. We also talk about how you can become mineral toxic. Certain minerals can build up to levels that cause problems in our bodies, much like heavy metals. And we talk about how heavy metals are persistent in our environment. They never break down. Our bodies can't break them down. They're all, it's similar to forever chemicals. There's a lot of, hoopla and, panic in on the internet and in the news about forever chemicals, but heavy metals are also like forever chemicals. They don't break down. They persist in our soils, in our food, in our water, in the air, and then in our bodies. So they're very, very problematic. And Clark also breaks down how heavy metals affect us. And he goes into his own personal story of different heavy metals he had and what happened when he eliminated them, how much better he feels now. We also talk about hair mineral analysis. Is it a valid testing tool? Is it, what are some of the issues with hair mineral analysis and how accurate is hair mineral analysis? There's a lot of really interesting concepts that we're going to talk about today on the show. And most importantly, why you need to detox, why it's so important to be healthy today because of what the research is showing about what heavy metals do to our body and to our health and our mental health as well. And I know you guys listening to this show, you're worried about detoxing your body. That's why you're listening. But one thing that's important to remember also is that our emotional trauma also causes many different health issues. The research shows that emotional trauma is responsible for 65% of physical health issues. This is what conventional medical research done by Kaiser Permanente is showing. And there's so much research to support this as well. And so if you want to be at your best, yes, you need to detox heavy metals and chemicals, but you also have to address your emotional trauma. This has been a personal passion of mine. After I totally detoxed my body and got myself to a very clean level, I still felt like there was just another level that I could go to with my mental health and with my physical health. And so I did a lot of research, and I have a free masterclass you can take on this. That's fascinating. It's totally worth your time. Go check it out at emo-detox.com, emo-detox.com. Check it out. I talk about all these 5 pillars of mental health. I talk a lot about how sound therapy can be used to, release emotional trauma from your body. I talk about all these different methods to release emotional trauma, and that that little piece of the puzzle is so important. So check it out. So our guest Clark Engelbert received his diploma in hair analysis certification through Westbrook University in West Virginia. And this is a program through Dr. Lawrence Wilson, who's a pioneer in the field of hair mineral analysis. And from 2003 to the end of 2004, Clark studied nutritional sciences at the University of Arizona. And in 2016, he re-enrolled at Boise State University to further educate himself in health sciences with a biochemistry emphasis, where he studied until 2017. And in 2018, he started his business, Nutritional Analytics, which specializes in utilizing hair analysis or hair tissue mineral analysis to assess minerals, heavy metals, and overall biochemistry of the body. And since starting his business, he's helped hundreds of people to regain good health and detoxify their heavy metal burden while analyzing close to 1,000 hair mineral analysis tests. You can learn more about Clark and his work at nutritionalanalytics.com. Clark, thanks for joining us on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Wendy. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I know. I've known you for so long on Facebook.
We've known each other for a while. Yeah.
It has to be coming up on 10 years, maybe.
Yeah, I think it is. That's basically, yeah.
Yeah. So we kind of followed each other's work, each other's detox journeys, and because you practice, using a hair tissue mineral analysis, and like I do, and you've been on a program to detox yourself for a really long time, and we exchange notes sometimes and follow each other's work. So it's been great to see you kind of develop your practice. Are involved in heavy metals research now. So tell us a little bit about your journey and why you're so passionate about detox.
Yeah. So all of this sort of started for me. I got into the alternative health space around pre-2010. I started to have issues in my early 20s. I'm 37 now. I started to have issues in my early 20s with anxiety, depression, panic attacks. I was kind of burning the candle at both ends as a young person, a young dude in college, and was drinking a lot with friends and working 40 hours a week, and I had a full load at school. So that basically resulted in me, having some serious anxiety attacks around that time. And I went through the medical system, and they really didn't have any answers for me. It was really pretty bad, actually. It messed with my mental state, to a significant degree. I started to have these anxiety attacks. I would go to the emergency room multiple times. They sort of, knew me on a first name basis at that point. And I never really got any good answers on what was going on. And I didn't really have any notion of what anxiety was at that point, what panic attacks were, any of that stuff. I had been pretty well adjusted up to that point. I was just sort of running myself into the ground. And so, I went through the medical system, went to my PCP, went to a bunch of different MDs, tried to figure out what was going on, and no one could give me any answers. And eventually I ended up on a couple drugs, medications for anxiety and depression. In and around 2007-ish, 2008. And those medications were really helpful in the beginning to deal with the anxiety and panic attacks that I was having. But within a year of taking those medications, I started to notice interdose withdrawal symptoms. And I was on Celexa and SSRI and Klonopin, a benzodiazepine. So I started to have pretty bad interdose withdrawal symptoms. And I started to realize that the medications were actually making me much worse. So that sort of started me on this path, 2008, 2009, of trying to figure out some of the underlying reasons why I felt the way that I did and why the medications weren't working. So I got into the alternative health space. I read Pam Kileen's book, and Pam was actually my first nutritional balancing practitioner. Still good friends with Pam. She's amazing.
Yeah, she's been on the podcast before too.
Yeah. I think I've watched those for sure. So Pam, I read her book, a couple other books, this book called Depression Free Naturally by Joan Matthews Larson. Other books by Julia Ross, like The Mood Cure, The Diet Cure. And I went to a bunch of different clinics to try and solve these issues. And eventually, I had to deal with the consequences of being on those medications for so long. So I kind of had to come off them. And I came off them around 2012, after trying many, many times to come off them. And it was not a fun experience. Coming off them, the withdrawal, especially from the benzo, was, pretty significant, not only in the short term time horizon. The acute withdrawal effects were really bad, but there's this thing that they call post-acute withdrawal, which, withdrawal from that medication can last for up to 2 years. So after that, I had gone up to Joan Matthews Larson's clinic to come off of the medications. And that's where I discovered nutritional balancing, mineral balancing. I'd remembered reading Pam's book, and there's a little piece about mineral balancing towards the end of her book, which is Addiction, the Hidden Epidemic. And someone had mentioned to me about hair testing at the facility that I was at to come off of the medications. And so I put two and two together, and I was like, oh, I'll email Pam and see what this is. So that was like late 2012, 2013. And that's when I got on a mineral balancing program. And nothing else had worked like that program once I got on it. So I started, late 2012, 2013, and have been doing it, been on a program since then. So about 10 years now. And along the way, went through many different metal eliminations. I was dealing with not only like the withdrawal effects from the medicines, but like I had a pretty bad gluten and dairy intolerance that I had developed while I was having those panic attacks in the beginning. So I had tolerated gluten and dairy and most foods for all of my life until that period of time. So I thought that was definitely very weird. But as a result of being on the medications, I ended up hypothyroid. I had really high blood sugar. I was super overweight. I was like 270 pounds, like I'm 6'2", but I sit at like 200 pounds now. That's like a good weight for me. But I had a lot, and just so many different other things layered on top of the anxiety, and so once I got on a mineral balancing program and started to eliminate metals, I just started to notice dramatic improvements in all of those parameters, and so it took me like a good 5 years on that program. I eliminated a bunch of nickel, and noticed like my suicidal thoughts went away, just disappeared. Went through some big copper and lead eliminations, and my anxiety went away. When you have like lead toxicity and you eliminate lead, you can almost feel like you're stimulated at this low level, like chronically, like your stress hormones are chronically elevated. That went away. Insomnia went away. High blood pressure went away. So, so a couple of years ago, I went back to school. I went to school at the University of Arizona for nutritional sciences. And then I went back to school up here at Boise State for biochemistry because I was inspired to do this work. And after that, I started this business, Nutritional Analytics, which is basically a mineral balancing business that, we use the hair tissue mineral analysis as sort of the baseline diagnostic to assess people's biochemistry and then engage in mineral balancing. And the mineral balancing, the idea is that triggers detoxification of the metals. And that's where people start to heal.
Yeah. And it's an amazing screening tool. Hair mineral HTMA or hair mineral analysis is a great screening tool for heavy metals and minerals. And talk to us about kind of why it's important to look at your minerals and to test for your minerals and heavy metals using a hair mineral analysis.
Yeah. So I feel like with the minerals, there's a couple facts about them that maybe people have glossed over or don't fully appreciate, which is that minerals are operating at this atomic level where if you think about what they are, they're simply different configurations of electrons and protons. They sit on the periodic table and they have different chemical characteristics, right? But at the most basic level, minerals are, operating at this atomic level where we often think about the body in terms of like this organizational or hierarchical approach, where we're trying to figure out what's at the most foundational level of your biochemistry. And people think of like DNA as like the final boss in that regard. But if you think about what DNA is, DNA at the most basic level is made of nitrogen, sugar molecules, and phosphorus. And so phosphorus is an essential element. So even DNA is made of these essential elements. So minerals, it's almost like minerals are operating on a very elemental level, even sort of below the level of DNA. And so they're operating at this atomic level, and you could think of them as like quantum in nature, where the light, water, and magnetism folks talk about this quite a bit in terms of light. Like light is quantum. Jack Kruse and those folks, and I have a ton of respect for those guys. But like minerals are sort of operating on that same level. And so that's the first thing about minerals, is that they're really at the most foundational level of your biochemistry. And there's a couple other ways that you can think about minerals. Minerals, they're also what I like to call pleiotropic, meaning, to borrow a term from genetics, minerals are used for hundreds and sometimes even thousands of different functions in your body. So we know that magnesium, everyone knows that magnesium is used for hundreds of different enzymes. Same thing with iron. Zinc is used 2,000 to 3,000 different times for different functions, right? And if we were to list like everything that zinc does, we could take up easily 2 hours, right? And so minerals are not only atomic and operating at that foundational level, but they're used across every conceivable system and organ in your body.
Yeah, and I think that's why people don't, they have all these different health issues going on, and they don't focus on minerals. We need minerals, the most basic thing that you can do to improve your health. And that's why people start a hair mineral analysis. They start taking all these minerals, and the right ones that they need. Right. And their health improves so much, or their sleep, or whatever's going on with them. And it's just, sometimes you just have to get back to basics.
Yeah, you really do. That's a really important point that you're making, is that the implications of the pleiotropic concept are that when one mineral gets out of balance, 10 or 20 or 30 different things can go wrong as a result of that one imbalance. So, and this explains, why when people come to me, or I'm sure when they work with you, they never come to you with just one problem. It's always like, I've got digestive issues, I have issues with insomnia or mental health problems. And to give it a concrete example, like zinc is used by the pancreas to extend the action of insulin, to synthesize digestive enzymes, for GABA in the brain as a GABA agonist. So when zinc gets low or becomes imbalanced against other minerals, you can end up developing symptoms related to insulin dysregulation. Low testosterone in men is very, very common, because zinc is used for testosterone, but then digestive issues and mental health issues as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a surprise that there's a lot of men that have low testosterone, and their doctors have been telling them for years, don't eat red meat because of the heart disease. There's so many people cutting out red meat, which is the most highly absorbable form of zinc. And there's a huge consequence in feminizing of men, and lower sperm counts, and the lower, testosterone levels, because zinc is needed for all those things.
Exactly. So, when you multiply that and you understand that, well, there's 21, 20, or 23 essential elements. If one of them gets dysregulated, you can have all these different problems. If multiple of them get dysregulated, which is quite common, especially in America, because the food supply is so denatured and nutrient poor, then you can see how problems just sort of exponentially get worse and worse very, very quickly. And that's not even to mention that minerals, another really important fact about them, exist in a system inside of you. And the implication of that is that they all affect each other. There are these nutrient interactions that occur. And if you have, say, like a low zinc, a lot of different consequences or effects can occur as a result of that low zinc in your other elements. Copper can build up, and that can cause anxiety. Heavy metals can build up because zinc sort of acts as like a universal buffer against metal toxicity. But also, I was reading a really interesting paper. There's an antagonism between zinc and sodium reabsorption in the kidneys goes up when zinc is low. So that could be one of the causes or reasons for sodium-sensitive hypertension. And it's sort of like, there's not only do minerals exist in a system and they affect each other, but there's like these second and third order effects that exist as a result of like one element being knocked out of balance.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, there's just so much to this, and you can have, as make a case for every mineral and the different issues that it causes when it's out of balance. And minerals displace metals out of the body. Can you talk about that phenomena and how taking minerals is a really good heavy metal detoxification?
Yes. So this principle, formally, in the literature is called Ionic mimicry. And it's a really, really important idea for people to understand. It's that while minerals exist in this system inside of you, heavy metals are a part of that system. And when you become low or you have biounavailable forms of the essential elements of the minerals, heavy metals can substitute for those essential elements. And it goes a little deeper than that. Not only are metals displacing or substituting those essential elements, but they actually work in the place of those essential elements. So, like if you have low zinc as an example, lead, mercury, and cadmium can all replace zinc on those enzymes that zinc is supposed to work on. So the enzyme efficiency gets poisoned as a result of this substitution process, but it keeps you alive in the short term. So like if you have nothing on certain enzymes, like if you don't have zinc at all, you could die. And so the body is actually using metals as like a short-term adaptive mechanism to keep these enzymes that you need to actually live and exist functioning at some low level. And so that's maybe another really important idea or concept that people, I don't feel like fully understand, is that, I know many people know about this, but minerals are the spark plugs of life. What does that mean, though? And it means that minerals are involved in as either structural components or functional regulators of like 25 to 30% of your enzymes in your body. And enzymes are these specialized class of proteins that are catalyzing biochemical reactions to make life possible. And so if you think about like the history of biochemistry research, and if anyone's listening who's taken Biochemistry 101 and had to go through like Leninger's Principles of Biochemistry, which is this insane textbook, that gave me nightmares in school.
That you just finished.
Yeah, right. It only
like
took me
last
10 years.
year, like,
Yeah.
you're like waking up at night,
Yeah.
and, terror.
Yeah, exactly. They talk about like enzymes in that book. There's a lot of chapters dedicated to the research and study of enzymes, but most of the history of biochemistry research is the history of enzymes, looking at how these specialized proteins operate and are catalyzing biochemical reactions. And the minerals are integral parts structurally and functionally of those enzymes. So that's also another really important point. But to understand the way that metals work or bioaccumulate, you have to understand how they're interacting with those essential elements in the first place.
Yeah, and people, because they have mineral deficiencies, their bodies retain these heavy metals.
Exactly.
And they become heavy metal toxic in one way because they're mineral deficient. And there's so many different reasons for mineral deficient.
Yes, exactly. That's probably, if people take nothing else away from this chat that we have today, I hope that they take away that point. It's that mineral deficiencies, it's not just deficiencies, but imbalances. They make you much more predisposed to bioaccumulate heavy metals. And there's actually really interesting research on the mechanism or the mechanisms through which this is happening. And so one of those mechanisms is sort of ionic mimicry, but the way ionic mimicry works is that the ionic radii of these elements is similar. So their sizes are actually very similar. And there's other chemical properties that they share. Maybe they have a similar valence or something. And that's what makes these heavy metals able to substitute and replace those essential elements in the first place. It's those similar chemical properties, the ionic radii, the size of these elements. Like I was reading a paper on this exact thing, and the ionic radii of magnesium, iron, and aluminum, they're all very, very, very similar in sizes. So it makes it so that aluminum replaces iron and magnesium very, very readily. And then, okay, what happens then when aluminum replaces magnesium on like an ATPase or other enzymes? that magnesium are responsible for. You can destroy energy production in the mitochondria. Like if aluminum is replacing iron, that can destroy electron chain transport. So like some of the most fundamental processes that are required to keep you healthy and well, they get disturbed as a result of those metals replacing those essential elements. And it's sort of like, I always try to tell people, clients, especially my consults, you should think of metals as like systemic toxicants, where they can locally exert a negative influence wherever they get deposited, like in your kidneys or your heart or your brain. But because of their ability to substitute for the essential elements in important enzymes, they can cause, 10 or 20 different problems just through their ability to impact inflammatory pathways all over the body, so that's really, really important. But like another fact about metals that I think people don't quite grasp either is that metals are not biodegradable. So they're actually a lot more important as a class of toxicants than a lot of the synthetics that are out there. But, there's literally, I'm sure this, tens of thousands of synthetic chemicals that are being used either intentionally in personal care products or whatever, or they're just inadvertently released through industrial processes in the environment. So metals are special because not only are they able to substitute for those essential elements, but they are not biodegradable, meaning when they get used in the environment or in industrial processes, they're getting discharged into the environment. They don't just go away. The accumulation process of those metals in like the air, in the water, in the soils, that's cumulative year over year and goes back, some of the metals, I think cadmium, the half-life is like 30 years, the half-life. So for half of the cadmium to be, broken down, it takes 30 years.
I know people get so worked up about, forever chemicals and
Right.
PUFAs and things like that. But heavy metals, this has been around for decades. It's not a new thing. And it's crazy how there's even in organic food, there's heavy metals. I did a show on that about how organic food can have tons of heavy metals. It might be chemical free, but there's lead and all kinds of other metals in there, arsenic from pesticide use and settling in the soil from the air, lead and things like that. So
Right. So, metals can substitute for the essential elements, which is maybe the most important thing that people understand. This leads to their systemic toxicity. And the fact that they're not biodegradable is also very problematic, but their ubiquity since the advent of industrialization is, I think, maybe the most important fact about them. People don't quite understand or have a grasp on, like, why are metals, why are they in the environment to such a degree that they are now? And it's really because they're useful in many different industrial processes. Like lead is still used in jet fuel as an anti-knocking agent. It was used in the gasoline in cars, which was a total health disaster for decades, but it's still used in jet fuel, right? Because it's very good as an anti-knocking agent. Nickel is used in the hydrogenation process for all of your trans fats. That's been done since they discovered that ability for nickel to be used as a catalyst in like 1915.
Yeah. And that's in all your fast food, all your packaged food, everything you're eating every day.
Exactly. And that, people talk about seed oils, and seed oils are bad and not good for you. But, metals are definitely, I think, much more toxic, much more pernicious, for those other reasons. But it's like like aluminum is used in the water supply as an antifungal agent because it's very good at killing fungal microorganisms. Arsenic is used to treat wood on like decks. It helps to prevent water damage, right? And so you would just be the ubiquity of these elements. You can't really overstate. Millions of tons of these elements are being mined so that they can be used for industrial processes. And, through the mining, those metals get in the air. Another really sort of interesting thing that I kind of dug up in my own research is that I wanted to know in terms of phosphate fertilizers, why are they so loaded with metals? And I was like, where is this coming from? Let's trace this back. And phosphate fertilizers have to be made from something, and they're made from phosphate rock. That phosphate rock has to be mined all over the world, deep within the earth. Well, metals are geogenic as well, meaning they're not synthesized or anything. We're actually having to mine them from the earth. And so through the mining process for that phosphate rock, a lot of metals get bound up in that rock, which gets ground down into this phosphate fertilizers. Okay, well, phosphate fertilizers are the most commonly used fertilizers all around the world. You're getting like a dose of cadmium with those fertilizers in every single pound of fertilizer that you're using on the soils. So these metals there's interesting ways that they're transferred basically from their point sources to how they get in the food chain and ultimately end up getting inside of you through this process that we call biomagnification. So lots of really interesting examples of that. I was always curious about mercury. Like everyone would always say, well, mercury is in the oceans, and it's like, well, how the hell did mercury get in the oceans? Doesn't seem like it was designed to be that way. And one of the most important ways that it gets into the ocean is through those smokestacks, those coal-fired power plants over in China and India, they don't have scrubbers on them. And so the metals are used in those processes to burn fossil fuels and coal in particular. And it gets spewed into the atmosphere, that mercury. And it's spewed into the atmosphere as elemental mercury. And it goes up into the atmosphere, rains down onto the ocean. And there's actually like an interesting process that occurs where mercury is biotransformed from elemental mercury into methyl mercury by certain microorganisms in the ocean. So elemental mercury is slightly less toxic than methyl mercury. And that's like another sort of wrinkle with metals that gets people sort of confused, is that there's different forms of the metals have different toxicity profiles. But, to go back to mercury, where it comes from and that sort of thing, the microorganisms in the ocean transform the elemental mercury into methyl mercury through methylation. So your body actually has that capacity to change the form of metals inside of you as well, which is pretty wild. So if methylation pathways are broken or messed up for whatever reason, that can affect your body's ability to protect you against metal bioaccumulation as well. So the microorganisms methylate the mercury, changes that elemental mercury into methyl mercury, and then you have small fish eating that microorganism, medium fish eating the small fish, large fish eating the medium fish, human beings eating the mercury, and ending up with mercury toxicity.
Eating all the sushi and the shellfish, the sushi addicts, and I'm an ex-sushi addict myself.
Yeah.
But
hey, it's really good. You
Yeah,
can't blame people for that.
it's so delicious. But yeah, I still have it every once in a while. It's impossible to avoid. Metals it's impossible to avoid in your diet, even if you eat organic food. And that's the message here, is you need to be detoxing your body, even if you have all these other healthy lifestyle habits and diet.
Yeah, exactly. And that's basically how I coach all my clients, which is to say, there's no way that you can avoid these elements. And actually, there's a couple really interesting papers I read a couple months ago on looking at metal deposition in these remote locations around the world. And there's a couple cool, really enterprising researchers. This one guy who was a mountain climber, also doubled as a researcher by day, was a mountain climber by night. He took his team of graduate students 20,000 feet up on Mount Everest. And they wanted to study the snow and soil samples of Mount Everest for metal deposition. And they found really high levels of cadmium and arsenic in the snow and soil samples 20,000 feet up on Everest. There's other really good studies looking at the Antarctic and some of the snow sheets in Greenland as well. They did a lot of this research after lead was discovered to exert like subclinical effects, like in the 1970s. So like there was a ton of research on lead, and that drove like scientists wanting to understand like the extent to which lead was deposited in these various locations. So there were studies in Greenland and Antarctica showing really high levels of lead. So it doesn't matter if you're like decide to become a monk or a nun and you try to like avoid these things like the plague, there's really no avoiding them because of their ubiquity.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, all the smokestacks and industry in countries around the world that gets into the weather patterns, deposits in our oceans, and air pollution is one of the number one ways that we get different toxins and heavy metals from car exhaust. So it doesn't matter if you're living out in the woods, you can still be breathing this stuff in.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, the most important thing to know is that the responsibility lies on you and your family to try and, detoxify these elements, because the governments are pretty incompetent. I don't know if there's malevolence involved. That's like maybe for a different discussion. But like the FDA recognizes aluminum, it's generally recognized as safe. So aluminum is used in a lot of different products, food products especially. It's used in like baking soda. It's used as an anti-caking agent in table salt. It's used in protein powders. It's used as an anti-coloring agent in like candy, or a coloring agent, I should say. It's used in cheese. And it's all because the FDA recognizes as aluminum as safe. But everyone like who has half a brain realizes that aluminum is neurotoxic. And there was a really interesting review that I read about a month ago in the Journal of Alzheimer's. So a pretty serious journal basically recognized Alzheimer's as basically chronic aluminum poisoning. And there was that interesting research that came out shining a light on some of the lies that were propagated by some scientists, saying that Alzheimer's is related to plaques and tangles in some of the neuronal compartments. Well, that may or may not be true, but what is causing those plaques and tangles in the first place? It's aluminum. There may be other metals involved, but aluminum is the main one implicated in those degenerative neurological conditions.
Yeah, I mean, the research is clear on that. I looked at a lot of that research as well, that aluminum is responsible for all different forms of dementia, including Parkinson's and there's many different forms. And so that's one of our greatest fears. That's one of, for so many people, they're worried about brain fog, or they watch their loved ones deteriorate from dementia. And that's for many people, they want to preserve their brain function, and detoxification is going to be a big factor in preserving that.
Huge. And the thing, I think that another thing that's really important for people to understand is there's these two ideas that make metals really pernicious, besides everything that we just talked about, which is that it wasn't discovered until like the 1970s that metals exert they can disrupt function at like a subclinical level, where it's not just the acute phase toxic effects of these elements that are responsible for you feeling bad. Like if you get occupationally exposed to a ton of lead, that's going to cause a lot of serious problems. But even at low levels, very low levels, lead and all of these other elements can contribute to a silent reduction in function of your enzymes, your proteins, your hormones, your neurotransmitters, and thus the effects of those problems, which manifest as like behavioral problems, lowered IQ, maybe you don't quite have as much energy, you don't fall asleep as quickly. Those are really subclinical effects of metals, basically. And that wasn't discovered until like 1973 by these two researchers, Grandjean and Landrigan, who were just brilliant. They're world famous scientists who discovered the subclinical effects of lead. And they were sort of the lightning rod for getting lead removed from the gasoline. So metals are exerting these subclinical effects on a very low level. And some people don't even really notice that they might be metal poisoned if they come out of their mother's womb with metal toxicity at like a subclinical level. Maybe they don't grow as tall. Maybe their facial symmetry doesn't develop very well, right? Maybe their bone structure is weaker. So that's, I think, really, really important for people to understand the subclinical effects of these metals. But then also, there's a latency period that exists from when you're exposed to the metal to when you present with symptoms. So this is pretty well known. This is in a book I read called The Toxicology of the Essential and Non-Essential Metals, written by Nicole Coleman and a bunch of other PhDs at Berkeley, if people are interested in reading that. It's a short read, but a phenomenal book. But they talk about how if you're exposed to these metals at low levels, which everyone is at this point, there's this latency period where, like cadmium, for instance, if you accumulate cadmium for whatever reason, there can be 5 or 10 years that go by before your the kidney function is affected. So it's sort of like very, very difficult to detect metal poisoning because it's not very obvious sometimes. Were you exposed in the first place, but symptoms may show up not until 5 and 10 years later. This is why, there's a couple good tests out there to diagnostically assess your metal burden. But this is really why I love the hair tests as just a critical piece for assessing your metal burden.
Yeah, because it's such an easy at-home test to do. Anybody can do it.
Very easy.
Yeah, it's very inexpensive. It's an amazing screening tool. But it's really important to test those minerals as well as heavy metals. There's tests that test for heavy metals like urine and stool,
Right.
but I always use hair testing as the initial screening tool. And can you talk a little bit about the validity of HTMA? Because I think there's a lot of people that don't understand how to read hair tissue mineral analyses, and they don't understand the no-show phenomenon in hair mineral analysis. And you see stuff on the internet about, oh, it's not accurate and blah blah blah. Let's just blow that out of the water here.
Yeah. So hair testing is very misunderstood, even in the literature. So there was a review I read in like 2018 looking at why there was such disagreement in the literature amongst researchers on whether or not hair analysis is a valid tool to assess the nutritional status of some of the elements, but also heavy metals. And part of the reason for the discrepancy in the literature, even amongst all the researchers, is that much of the research done with hair analysis didn't consider that mineral and metal deposition in the hair is not uniform like it is in the blood. So with blood testing, you can take a blood sample one time and then 5 minutes later get another blood sample from a different area. And the mineral deposition and the metal deposition in the blood will be uniform. It won't change. But the hair, it does change because it's a biopsy tissue. And the hair being an extension of the skin organ, like different amounts of those minerals will be deposited at different times in your hair. So you won't find good answers in the literature. You have to understand the first principles about hair analysis, which is the first and most important thing to understand about hair analysis is that hair is a biopsy tissue. So you should think of the hair as really an extension of your skin, which is a biologically active organ. Like your skin has many important like thermoregulatory functions. It acts as a protective barrier against environmental stimuli. It has detoxification functions. The hair, to that end, serves a lot of those similar functions and requires everything that other biological tissues require to live and to carry out those things. So the hair is a biologically active organ, and it's like a biopsy test. I think another thing that people misunderstand about hair is that they think that the hair is telling them about the total body load of any individual mineral. But it's more about reading the entire mineral system. And it's like an early indicator of what's going on with your entire mineral system. So in this way, the hair test is kind of like an ionomics test where it's measuring not individual mineral levels, but it's measuring the balance of the entire mineral system all at one time. And so those are, I think, some of the bigger reasons why people get hung up on, is hair analysis valid? There's a lot of research showing that, hair analysis is actually quite remarkable and able to read, if you understand it in its proper context, it's able to give us an early indication of imbalances in mineral levels and ratios and what's going on with the entire mineral system. So it's not necessarily about reading individual mineral levels. It's always about understanding that the minerals exist in a system and that the hair test is measuring that entire system in the cells, right? But also over about a 3-month period of time.
Yeah, and it can look at mineral toxicities as well, correct? Because those can be very, very problematic and cause health issues just like heavy metal toxicities.
Exactly. That's the thing that can be kind of confusing, is that while the minerals are essential for life, any of the individual elements in either the wrong form or in too high a dose, you can become toxic in those elements. So it's not the same as like heavy metals, where any small dose of a heavy metal is toxic. The dose for the essential elements really makes the poison, because they're essential for running like your enzymes and all of these other functions that exist in your body. So you're right about this. Like, it's about, with the minerals, it's about balancing them against each other, making sure that nothing is too low or nothing is too high at the same time. There's sort of like a dose response curve for each of the elements, where you can end up with a fatal deficiency, but you can also have a fatal toxic excess at the other end of the spectrum. And there's like a little narrow band there where an optimal intake will lead to optimal function.
Yeah. And so what are some of the more like common heavy metal toxicities that you're seeing in your clients?
Aluminum is by far the most common. I haven't read a test in the last 4 years where the aluminum level was in a good range. So aluminum is by far the most ubiquitous metal in the environment. It's the third most common metal in the Earth's crust, so it's pretty ubiquitous geogenically. But in terms of the way that it's used in industry, metal, or aluminum, I should say, is used in the water supply in many Western countries. So plus there's like 1,000 other industrial uses for aluminum. So aluminum is the most common. The next most common, I would say, is probably mercury. I read a really interesting paper. I find this interesting. Some people might find this like horrifying, but I read a really interesting paper a couple months ago on the manufacture and use of high fructose corn syrup. And since the advent of it, I believe it was synthesized in the 1960s, they used mercury to make the high fructose corn syrup. So my generation of people, millennials, I was born in 1984, and I think probably you guys too, and Gen X, we were drinking soda like it was going out of style when we were younger, and so that, I think, is a huge exposure vector for people. Besides just the fish, it's used in other, mercury is very useful for other applications as well. But, it being in the soda, kind of like with aluminum being in the water, well, let's look at soda's high fructose corn syrup plus water. So it's a combination of aluminum and mercury in a can, basically. And what's really pernicious about that, soda in particular, is that the sugar forces your body to use up minerals to process it. Yes. So it's like a double whammy, where the sugar and the caffeine are depleting your essential elements while you're getting a dose of aluminum and mercury at the same exact time.
Yeah, it's so insidious. Every meal I had a Coke.
Same.
For decades. It was a really long time, and then maybe it was like 20 years or something like that, but until I kind of woke up to that. But that's just one exposure over decades. There's just so many examples that we can cite that I've talked about so much on the podcast. So how do we get rid of this stuff? How do we eliminate heavy metals?
So there's a couple general strategies that I can talk about first. The strategy that I use with my clients is called mineral balancing. And this is really like a specialized form of heavy metal detox, where really what we're trying to do is optimize and balance the mineral levels in your tissues. And this causes a dramatic improvement in enzyme efficiency, energy efficiency in the cells, and other parameters related to your detox pathways. And that is really the trigger that we're using to detox metals, is mineral balancing. But some general strategies I think that people should keep in mind are, you want your diet to be as nutrient dense as humanly possible. So like extreme diets, you want to avoid those like the plague. So like veganism, I think carnivore is quite a bit better than veganism. So, sometimes, I don't know, carnivores get kind of sensitive like the vegans when you say, well, maybe vegetables aren't making you sick.
Well,
I don't know.
I'm vegan, Clark. What's wrong with
Wow.
veganism? I'm totally joking.
Wow. I was going to say your brain is actually working pretty well for vegan.
Guys, I actually was I was vegetarian for like 18 months, and then I went vegan for about 6 months. Oof, yeah, I could not think at the end. I could not hold information by the end of that 6 months. I was reading all this health stuff. I couldn't remember any of it. I don't know if much has changed, but I'm joking. But I couldn't remember what I was reading. I was like, oh, I want to get a master's degree. I had these goals for my education. I was like, how am I even going to do that? So I don't know how vegans survive. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and the thing about veganism, before we get back into the ways to avoid metal toxicity, not only are you short on iron and zinc, B vitamins, taurine, but there's no sulfhydryl amino acids that you're getting, like cysteine and methionine. And those are sort of like your body's first line defense against metal toxicity. So you definitely want to avoid extreme diets. We're designed as omnivorous beings to eat plants and animals. Sometimes people have, individual food sensitivities. They have to stay away from a specific food. I find that's usually metal toxicity. But the idea is that you want to stay away from extreme diets, basically. Optimize for nutrient density. So like what we use with our clients is a modified version of paleo, where we're getting a lot of high quality meats, a lot of high quality vegetables that are cooked, but you really want to maximize nutrient density. Raw dairy is phenomenal, just incredible source of the fat soluble vitamins and minerals like calcium and magnesium. So optimizing for nutrient density is the most important thing. Number two would be just to do the best that you can in your daily life to avoid common exposure vectors for metals. Stop drinking tap water. It's got fluoride and aluminum in it. There could be lead in it, like the Flint Water crisis showed us all how, in certain municipal areas, there's lead toxicity in the water.
I think there's so many Flints. There's so many Flints around that just have not gotten the news story.
The crazy thing about Flint was that what happened was, mechanistically, is that they started to draw on their water from a different source. And the source of that water had a different pH. So it caused the lead pipes that had previously been used, actually somewhat safely, to leach the lead because the pH in the water was different. So there's subtle things like that can really affect your exposure, so.
Yeah, and the same thing can happen with you. A lot of company or municipal water sources used to use chlorine. Like LA did this, and they switched to chloramine, which is cheaper, but that can leach metals from the pipes as well. And these are things that are happening all over the place, and people just aren't really paying attention.
Yeah, exactly. So you want to avoid common exposure vectors like in the water. Another really interesting thing quickly about aluminum and fluoride is that with metals, there's synergistic effects. There's synergistic toxic effects, I should say. So a small amount of aluminum will be toxic, but a small amount of fluoride paired with that can actually create a more toxic compound. I believe it's called aluminum fluorosilicate. Has this unique ability to cross the blood-brain barrier, is more toxic than either of those elements individually. So this is something that isn't discussed in the literature as much, and it's something probably for future avenues of research, but the synergistic effects of metals are quite significant, and that's how we're actually exposed to them on a daily basis, where a lot of the research on metals right now is devoted to studying individual elements and their specific effects on certain systems, where, you know, Sally down in Texas or wherever and up in Ohio, you know, who's been drinking tap water her whole life, she's exposed to all manner of different metals, and those metals have synergistic effects, synergistic negative effects that are much worse than any individual exposure to those elements. Plus, you're getting all these other synthetic toxicants on top of that. We really don't know all of the effects of all of these things in the environment and on human beings.
Yeah, I don't know how we're even still alive. It's just like there's...
Well, you're probably using your sauna pretty regularly, am I right?
I am. Yeah, I love my
Same.
sauna. I love my foot baths. Yeah, I'm just, living that detox lifestyle, which people need to be doing these days. Like, can you talk about, your recommendations to people when it comes to heavy metal detox?
Yes. So the biggest things would be maximize nutrient density. If you want to work with me and get on a mineral balancing program, that would be, I think probably the best thing that people can do. The mineral balancing has these phenomenal effects on your endogenous aspects of your detoxification systems. So really what we want to try and do with mineral balancing is optimize your own detoxification network inside of you that you have, which is much more powerful, than any individual supplement that you can take. So you have an endogenous detoxification network inside of you, metal binding proteins, antioxidant enzymes, and your hormones, which is kind of an interesting avenue for research. But hormones send signals, like adrenal and thyroid hormones send signals to the liver to activate detoxification enzymes. So ceruloplasmin, metallothionein, other detoxification enzymes and metal binding proteins are activated in the presence of your adrenal and thyroid hormones. So improving adrenal and thyroid function is a big vector for improving your body's own ability to detoxify. So that would be another thing that you could focus on. Lowering stress in your life, huge. Detoxification is a parasympathetic activity. It's only activated through the parasympathetic branch of your autonomic nervous system. So anything that you can do to chill out, relax, get in the sun, if you're in a great location like Wendy is.
Yeah, live in Mexico. I highly recommend it to relax.
Yes, so jealous. So jealous.
It's I think people don't realize when they're all really stressed out and chronically stressed out for years, they're not sleeping, they're not detoxing, and they accumulate this stuff over years and years and years. And they wake up one day, why am I fat? And why am I, unhappy? And why can't I sleep? And they start having all these different health issues as a result of that.
100%. So doing anything that you can to get yourself in the parasympathetic, grounding is very good for that purpose. Getting in the sun, like sunbathing, is very parasympathetic. There's a lot of really interesting research on UVB affecting cortisol levels. So that's huge. But the sauna space type of saunas, phenomenal. Those are, in my opinion, that's the single most important biohack that you can do to prevent metal toxicity. Because you're not only getting the photobiomodulation effects from the near infrared frequency coming off of those lights, which is optimizing your mitochondrial function. You're getting the heating effects and the sweat effects caused by those mid and far infrared frequencies coming off of them. So blocking EMF, so these are some foundational things that you can do to lower your stress levels. I read some really interesting research on certain magnetic fields being able to deplete zinc and selenium. So that's sort of in relation to optimizing your mineral intake, right? It doesn't have much to do with how much you're taking in, but preventing minerals from being lost. Anything that you can do will help to protect you against metal toxicity. So, sauna, a lot of the things that Jack Kruse and those folks talk about, phenomenal. Like the light exposure, sun exposure, optimizing nutrient density, getting rid of the exposure vectors. And then, sometimes people go down that road of trying to do all those things, and they're sort of at an impasse, and they need something more. At that point, I think mineral balancing is really for those folks.
Yes, yeah, because you can do all these detox protocols, like you said, infrared saunas and taking various like supplements and trying to do like a shotgun approach to detox. But
Right.
for sure, doing that mineral balancing and heavy metals testing can help you with that kind of, more sniper approach to
Yeah.
and optimizing your body's ability to detox. It's not just going in and grabbing the metals and pulling them out. It's just not that simple. I mean,
Right.
that's kind of how we want to think about things, but can you explain that concept a little bit? And like chelation, like why chelation using IV, heavy metal chelation therapy is maybe not really the best strategy for a lot of people.
100%. And that's exactly where I was going with this, is that if you go back to what we were talking about with ionic mimicry and how metals substitute for minerals, and that's the main mechanism through which metals bioaccumulate in the first place, then you understand that if you just rip the metals out where they're replacing the essential elements on certain critical enzymes, then you realize, well, if I just rip this metal out using, it could be a synthetic chelating agent, EDTA, DMSO, it doesn't really matter. It could be something as simple as zeolite or chlorella or something else. If you rip out that metal and you don't leave anything at that enzyme binding site for it to function, you can make yourself much, much worse. And so it goes back to understanding, how does metal bioaccumulation happen in the first place? And it's related to the mineral imbalances. That's the critical piece for people to understand. But chelating agents oftentimes chelate out essential minerals as well. So not only are you ripping out that metal, which is actually serving a purpose inside of you, an adaptive purpose, but you're lowering your mineral status even more through the use of chelation.
Yeah.
So mineral balancing is sort of like the anti-chelating method, where we don't focus on any individual metal. We're focusing in on balancing the entire mineral system and reverse engineering the mineral imbalances to cause metal detoxification down the line. Chelation is the very opposite of that approach, where you're just pulling out the metals, you're targeting individual metals, which can be problematic, if that metal is being used for something important to keep you alive.
Yeah. Yeah. And then in doing the chelation, that's not addressing chemicals at all as well. Whereas if you're optimizing your body's ability to detox and sleep and mineralize, your body's going to be more efficient at excreting that stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So this is an amazing conversation. I think that it's really important to help people understand in a more granular way, like how detoxification occurs and why you need to be testing for heavy metals, and, making the case yet again on every podcast, why you need to be adding detox to your healthy lifestyle. Because diet, exercise, supplements, it is not enough. I can't tell you how many friends I know that are sick or that have died or had cancer or something, and they're living relatively healthy, but they're not thinking about detox, not doing stuff in regards to that, because you're not getting this info at your doctor.
Yeah, I come across so many clients who are in that same boat, who they've been doing the right things for many years, and their tests sometimes will come back with high levels of metals, and I'm just like, don't shoot the messenger. Like, I'm not telling you that you're doing anything wrong, but these elements are so ubiquitous, it's very hard to escape them. Even if you do the right things, you do have to add that extra tier of mineral balancing, using these detoxification procedures that we recommend in a strategic way, if you really want to rid yourselves of these poisons.
Yeah, and people get upset too. They get upset, or they get really scared about the results. And I was surprised too. I lived this super healthy lifestyle most of my life. And when I got my test results back, and I'd been reading about mercury or lead, and reading about all these things in, reading about health, you come across articles about mercury, but I didn't think they applied to me because I was so healthy. And so you
Right.
think, oh, it takes some acute exposure, or I don't know what I thought it would take.
Mhm.
But when I got my test results back and I had super high mercury and arsenic, I was really surprised. And for me, it just sparked this light bulb that just has not gone out. It's just,
Right, right.
just started this ball rolling with wanting to learn everything about this and helping other people discover this missing piece of the puzzle that they need to be healthy and reach their health goals.
Exactly. And that's, it was just on Matt Blackburn's podcast. And I basically said to him the same exact thing, that heavy metal, environmental pollution and exposure to human beings is the most important human health problem on the face of the planet right now, by far. Part of it has to do with its ubiquity, but people just aren't paying attention to it. So it's so underrated. But, if you really look at the details like we have and gone through them in this podcast, you realize that it's a much more important problem than people are aware of. So if you become aware of it, you can really have some power and take some power back in your own life, to detox these things. Once you go through metal detoxification, you can feel like a different human being, almost totally. So that I think is, another really important thing for people to understand.
What are some of the metals that you detoxed over the years?
Yeah. So I went through some pretty wild lead eliminations, like absolutely insane lead elimination. So I think, over the course of my life, I was exposed to lead at a low level, but there was one event that occurred maybe like 12 years ago. I was living with an ex-girlfriend at the time in an old place in Tucson, and she wanted to do a weekend project where we would scrape off the paint on her walls in her bathroom. And at the time, I was kind of like an idiot. And, she was like, you really should wear a mask. There's lead in the paint. I was like, I'm fine. I'm going to be fine. Shut up, whatever. And so I was breathing in these lead-based paint fumes for a couple days doing this project with her. So I was exposed, you could say, occupationally to lead. But after that, like, my anxiety got much worse. Lead can cause like violent thoughts and criminality in some people. There's a lot of really interesting research on that. And how the metals interact in the brain is like a whole nother, we could do another podcast on that. We should do that. That would be, I think, a really fascinating episode. But lead was a very big one for me. Going through some lead eliminations changed my life completely. My sleep got better. I lost 50 pounds after eliminating lead. So there's a lot of endocrine effects that these metals have as well that, people should be aware of. I went through some huge copper eliminations as well. So I think lead and copper is sort of like the two metals that cause anxiety and mental health problems more than any other of the metals. But copper, lead, nickel was a big one for me. I used to have really bad suicidal thoughts. And I went through my first elimination on mineral balancing was a nickel elimination early on. You can ask Pam. She went through it with me. I'd be calling her being like, I feel so awful. What's going on here? And went through the lead elimination and the nickel elimination, the suicidal thoughts went away. It was really remarkable. So those are the three big ones for me. Also went through some big tissue calcium eliminations as well.
Yeah, and the calcium can be very numbing. I
Exactly.
think the body's innately intelligent. People have pain syndromes or abuse or other things
Right.
going on. The body will kind of accumulate calcium in the soft tissues, just kind of like numb the nervous system transmissions that can transmit pain or cause perceptions of pain.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, calcium, it can just make you feel like calcium's a buffering agent anyway, so it buffers you against stress. But if it builds up in toxic amounts, it can make you feel numb and like you can't feel anything, or it can actually really affect the energetic mechanisms in the cells as well. So it can make you very tired.
Mm-hmm. It's really, yeah, it's all the whole like effects of minerals in the body and the deficiencies and the toxicities. It's fascinating. It's really, really interesting. But the bottom line is people just want to feel better. That's why you're listening to the show. You don't want to detox and do all this stuff. You just want to
Right.
feel better, right?
Right.
But this is what you have to do. You have to do detox kind of protocols to get there. So, so Clark, thanks so much for coming on the show and imparting your wisdom. I know you've been involved in the heavy metals research study, and you've done a lot of research over the last decade on this topic. So it's really a pleasure to have you on the show. So where can we find you, and where can the listeners work with you?
Yeah. So, just wanted to say thank you, Wendy, so much for having me on. It's an honor. I've been following you for a while, and like you're doing incredible work as well. So, totally jealous of your business and everything that you've been able to accomplish. But people can find me at www.nutritionalanalytics.com. That's the name of our health consulting service that we have. Specializes in using hair tissue mineral analysis to set up healing protocols to detoxify your metals and cause healing. So you can find me there. I'm also on Instagram. Have been using Instagram quite a bit more lately. It's all lowercase, nutritional_analytics is the handle on Instagram. You can also find me on Facebook at the Nutritional Analytics page. Just type that in into the search bar, or you can look. I'm posting quite a bit on my personal profile, Clark Jeffrey on Facebook, or you can email me, clark@nutritionalanalytics.com. So lots of ways that you can get a hold of me, and definitely still have some slots open for clients now. So would love to work with people.
Okay, great. Yeah, you might be sorry you gave your email after the show publishes, but yeah, everybody email Clark with all of your questions.
I know, right?
Well, Clark, thanks for coming on the show. And everyone, I'm Dr. Wendy Myers of MyersDetox.com. Thanks so much for tuning in to the show today. And it's really a pleasure every week to be able to have experts from around the world, help to maybe give you that one last that little key in the puzzle to help you upgrade your health. And that's why I'm doing this. So thanks so much for tuning in and taking the time. I'll talk to you guys next week.
The Myers Detox podcast is created and hosted by Wendy Myers. This podcast is for information purposes only. Statements and views expressed on this podcast are not medical advice. This podcast, including Wendy Myers and the producers, disclaim responsibility for any possible adverse effects from the use of information contained herein. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. Individuals on this podcast may have direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. If you think you have a medical problem, consult a licensed physician.